Anti-Muslim hate apparently accounts for half of all racially motivated crimes in the United Kingdom. So, why does the government refuse to adopt a definition of Islamophobia? You're watching Roundtable. You know, it may be just a matter of the little details, the words, but surely they matter. The Conservatives here saying that there are already enough laws to protect Muslims from hate speech and actions, but others in the UK Parliament have come up with their own definition of Islamophobia, and it's proving divisive.
He grabbed my scarf from here and tried to pull it off and shouted at me to remove my scarf, take it off.
Sophia Dar was attacked on one of London's busiest streets, targeted for wearing a symbol of her religion, a victim of Islamophobia.
There is fear, there's no doubt about that, but it's not going to stop me from wearing my hijab.
And Sophia's experience is not isolated. Mosques have been vandalised, and a former UK Foreign Secretary has likened women wearing the face veil to bank robbers and letterboxes. Many Muslim communities across Britain say they've been left feeling scared. In 2017, Darren Osborne drove into a crowd of worshippers leaving a mosque in North London. One man died and 9 others were injured in what police called a terrorist attack. British Muslims have often found themselves the subject of controversial media headlines and say this has helped to fuel the rise in anti-Muslim hate. One group of British MPs says it's time for an approved definition of Islamophobia to help root out the problem. They say Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness.
Like there is a law about anti-Semitism, we shouldn't say anything against the Jews, and it's correct for that to happen, so there should be the same for Muslims. Things for Muslims are getting worse in Britain.
British Muslims make up around 5% of the UK population. But last year, over half of victims of religious hate crimes were Muslims. 47% of Britons think the country has become less tolerant of Islam and Muslims. Statistics and evidence show Islamophobia is on the rise. Many Muslims in Britain feel under constant attack, and the situation seems to be getting worse. Part of tackling the problem is to identify it. So should the UK government define Islamophobia to help Muslims feel safer in Britain?
Pleased to say that joining me at the round table today we have Afzal Khan MP from the All-Party Parliamentary Group on British Muslims. It put together the definition after months of consultation. Mohammed Amin is here too, chairman of the Conservative Muslim Forum, has his own thoughts on this. And Imran Shah's here too from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. Warm welcome to each and every one of you. Afzal Khan, let me ask you first of all, why was a definition needed? Because the Conservative government says enough laws are in place to protect people from illegal actions.
Well, the Conservative government is wrong. If you look at the evidence, the last 20, 30 years, it's building that actually there is a real problem with this area. We've seen the Runnymede Trust report. They came earlier on, then 10 years down the road, they then follow up. Nothing has changed, things are getting worse. Their own evidence from the stats from the government is showing things are getting worse. So every angle you look at, you can see the situation is getting worse, and government's actually not doing anything about it.
I'm not sure anybody denies that there's a problem here, but what difference is this going to make? I mean, the laws are there.
Well,
the hate speech and the hate crimes are increasing, but is a definition of Islamophobia actually going to make any difference?
What is clear is whatever has been happening up to now is not dealing with the problem. Problem is getting worse. So clearly we can't keep repeating the same issue. We have to come up with different to see if we can solve it. And it's this definition we think is going to take things forward.
Let me read out the definition, or part of it anyway. Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. I'll come back to you on that in just a moment. Mr. Khan suggests that this is going to make a difference to the way crimes are handled by the authorities and the way that perhaps people perceive Muslims to be. But what kind of difference are a few words like that going to make?
Well, in some way, the difference will be on the ground. It will help councils, it will help police deal with the street thugs, the people that are actually committing the hate crime. And like just to add
But tell me how this is going to make a difference. These are fine words.
Sure.
But what practical difference can they make? How's it going to help the police?
Right. So in terms of the statute law, the difference between religious hate crime and racial hate crime is very different. So what I mean by that is that racial hate crime by law seems more serious than religious hate crime.
The word racism is put in here.
So what is trying to be put across is that actually what we see here is religious hate crime being used in a way, in the same mechanisms that racism has been used in the past.
But can I just put this to you?
Yeah.
Muslims are not a race.
Sure, but
And yet you've said that these crimes are against a particular people's race. Muslims are not a race.
Yes, but the way in which they have been targeted. So, for example, Jewish people are being protected by the racial against racial hate crime, and the same things that have been happening to the Jews in the past, like the targeting of clothing, the targeting of appearances, the targeting of certain cultural practices, that is essentially racism. Now, what's been happening so far is that Islamophobes have been using that exact line to essentially cement their idea that they are talking in terms of freedom of speech, when really they have a free card to spread hate.
And I also believe the same applies, you say, with the Jewish population, but the same applies also to Sikhs.
Yes.
It is racism,
Exactly.
racism there. You're from a conservative background. Do you agree with the government's stance on this, that this is a waste of time, money, effort, and the protections are already there?
Well, I'm not here to speak for the government, but I agree with the government's approach. Hate crime is already illegal. We have extra punishment if it's racially aggravated hate crime. We have extra punishment if it's religiously aggravated hate crime. The laws are already there. And the main reason I object to the word Islamophobia itself is that when you get it in debate, you actually end up harming Muslim interests. Because instead of an argument about anti-Muslim hatred and anti-Muslim bigotry, you get diverted into arguments about the interpretation of religion, because for over 20 years, people were flogging a previous definition of Islamophobia that made no sense. The current definition of Islamophobia uses the word racism. It uses the word racism in a very academic sociological sense, but not in a sense that the man in the street understands. Because the one thing the man in the street knows about Muslims, even if he's completely ignorant about Islam, he knows that Muslims are not a race. Dr. Chris Allen, who can't be here, he is white British. I am ethnically Punjabi. We are both members of the human race, but that's the only race we have in common. Muslims are not a race. When you start using a definition and straight away you're into an argument about the definition, you're losing the argument. You have a few minutes to argue something, whether you're arguing with a person in the flesh or whether you're appearing in the media, and you need to concentrate on the thing that really matters, which is that anti-Muslim discrimination is wrong, anti-Muslim violence is wrong, anti-Muslim hatred is wrong, and getting fixated on the word Islamophobia. If we had a clean sheet and we could define Islamophobia starting with a clean sheet, that would be different, but we don't have a clean sheet.
If you were starting with a clean sheet, how would you define it? In other words, what would your choice of words be?
Well, to create a clean sheet, I've actually proposed a brand new word that has no history, anti-Muslimism. And you can define anti-Muslimism as a type of hatred of Muslims, discrimination against Muslims. I have actually published on my website a definition of anti-Muslimism, which is deliberately and consciously modeled on the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, because frankly, what I perceive...
Well, tell us what it is.
It's hatred of Muslims, discrimination against Muslims, treating Muslims less well than you treat people of other religions. That's what anti-Muslimism is. And my concern is that my fellow Muslims are so hung up with jealousy about the word anti-Semitism that they're obsessed with having a single word to define anti-Muslim behavior. And they fixated on the word Islamophobia, but the problem is that Islamophobia has a 20-year broken history, which is not fixable.
I saw the look you gave just then, Afzal.
Well, clearly, I
Because
disagree.
this is your baby, isn't it?
Well, it's not necessarily me. There's many others who've been engaged, and they've been engaged for many decades now. I think this is a good attempt. We had 70 academics who was engaged. We had the lawyers, one shadow attorney general, previous from Conservative Party attorney general, who've also been involved in defining this. It's okay with them. You know, the people outside the Muslim community, they've been engaged with it. They're okay. It's academics, people like Amin, who's got a problem. Why should we waste more time in trying to work something else out? I've got no problem with the definition Mr. Amin is saying, but here's something which is already agreed. Here's a definition which has been across the board now being accepted. Over 800 organizations have adopted. Even this weekend, last week, in Scotland, every single political party has accepted
Because it's easier to say yes than it is to say no when you've put all this work in. I mean, the point is that you've used the word racism in here when we've discussed this. Muslims are not a race, and you talk about the differences between different types of Muslims, and you say it's jealousy. Jealousy, what do you say to that?
But what I say is, look, the laws we've already had, if you look at this hate crime that's been mentioned here, yeah, and aggravated with the religious, in the last nearly 10 years, only 6 people have been actually charged. Clearly, when you look at the reality of the Muslims who were suffering day in, day out, that is not what's happening. It's a huge. If you look at the students, what's happening? If you look at the graduates, they have to apply 3 times more. If you look at the jobs, they are 3 times virtually more unemployed. Every field you look at, there's a problem. So clearly, we can't just sit back. We need to have a real go at this.
Job
But you need-
discrimination on the grounds of religion is
Anytime.
already illegal.
So
Anytime you want to jump in, please
I
don't
feel-
wait for me. Yeah.
I feel it's quite appalling to hear that Muslims are jealous of the Jewish community for their definition of anti-Semitism. Look, the Muslim community are suffering out there. They are suffering from the media, from politicians, on the street, in the workplace, on every level of society. Clearly, if the police could prosecute, if the CPS could prosecute these people, whether they are spreading hate in the media or on pedestals in demonstrations, they would be easy to prosecute. There is an issue with the law. There is no definition of Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hatred for that matter. And the problem is that we don't. There is therefore no bearing or benchmark for institutions to be able to enforce the law.
Right. This
And
is
that's why
not
Muslims are
law yet. It is a long way off
Sure.
from that. But I just
But I think the problem is the government should make sure that this does become a law, and it's the government which are dragging their feet. I wrote to the chair of the Conservative Party 3 times, and he did not even have the decency even to do a reply to my letters. I've asked the Prime Minister 3 times in the House of Commons a question. She's avoided it every single time. And then when you look at the figures of what's happening outside, all the political parties, the biggest problem is in the Conservative Party, and they're the one who also dragging the feet. I wonder why.
Can we perhaps put party politics to one side on
that's
this
reality
one?
on the
No,
ground.
and I want to talk about how you think that this new definition and perhaps new approaches might lead to fewer
How can we
hate
leave the
crimes.
parties at side when the Conservative Party are in power?
All right,
They're
but
the ones who are
Imran
making the law.
here was saying that this definition will help with prosecutions, help with stopping people
Yes, if it's a
from...
law.
Okay,
Yeah.
we know that, but you say before it becomes a law, you think an attitude will be changed, perhaps?
Yes, so I mean the legality of the issue is that we are lacking a basis in which people who commit anti-Muslim hatred or commit instances of Islamophobia are not able to essentially be prosecuted. But just because there's a legal change doesn't mean that essentially that Muslims are instantly safe. Yes, it will do a lot of good to know that Islamophobia as a definition is accepted, and that will create some comfort for Muslims across the board. But really what we need is a cultural shift. Yes, okay, if a law is passed as an act of parliament, police need to be trained, local authorities need to essentially filter that through their public institutions, and there needs to be a cultural shift. If we don't have that cultural shift, then really, in the same way we have racism in the media, we have racism amongst politicians, we'll still have Islamophobia amongst media and politicians. And so that will never really go away. So yes, okay, the legality of it must be sorted, but that's not the end all of be all.
But are we in danger perhaps here Mohammed, of ending up with having to define hatred against any particular and all particular religious groups, such as the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the Quakers, the Presbyterians, the Episcopals, Christians in general. Is that where we're going?
Look, there is already law in place for dealing with religiously aggravated hate crime. Already in place.
6 in 10 years.
What
But
is coming out now from my colleagues' comment is actually they're not really looking just for a definition of Islamophobia. They want to change the law on what constitutes religious hatred. Quite soon they will be saying it's religious hatred if you basically criticize Islam. 22 years ago, the problem started when Runnymede published an awful report which conflated attitudes to Muslims and attitudes towards the religion of Islam. And that has bedeviled the word Islamophobia ever since.
Is Mohammed right in suggesting that what you want is more laws in place to lead to prosecutions? Not that those laws are enforced better, that perhaps you would like to see somebody like Boris Johnson, the former Foreign Secretary, prosecuted for describing women who wear the hijab as looking like bank robbers or letterboxes. Is that as far as you would? Is that Islamophobia?
Well,
as far as you would like to see it?
Well, it is. It is. But the issue, I think, at the heart of it isn't simply just about hate. The definition is actually much wider. You see, if someone is wearing a headscarf and is being discriminated, my wife, who's a dentist, went for a job and she was questioned about her job. This is why.
But isn't that perhaps being oversensitive? Did she not ask? Are you asking me this for religious reasons, or are you asking me this because it's something to do with medical procedures?
No, it's nothing to do with the medical procedure. It happens to be okay. This is an example of she was a dentist. No, that's not what the issue is. The issue ultimately is when you look at all these figures, Muslims' lives are having impact on this because of who they are. And that means there's a discrimination taking place as well in all walks of life.
Would you like to see somebody such as Boris Johnson prosecuted?
Yes, of course.
For this description? Why?
Yeah, because like what he's doing is targeting clothing. If he said the same thing about Jewish men having hooked noses, or about black...
But no, but that's part of your body, isn't it? I mean, if he said that, you know, a Sikh's turban looked like it was a bird's nest...
Okay, maybe it's part of a Jewish clothing, or maybe it's about the cultural references of Trinidadians or Jamaicans that the Tory party is now deporting. Whatever it is, the targeting and the vilification of those Muslim women and the hate crime it created as a response, he has to be responsible for that, especially for a person in power. So why not?
But I understand that hate crimes are going up, and I do understand that Muslims are being unfairly targeted. But some of this makes me think that you are particularly thin-skinned when it comes to criticisms, such as the one... And I mean, look, he said it in a buffoonish sort of way, didn't he? Yeah. He said they looked like bank robbers because, you know, they had hats on, and they looked like letterboxes because they were just looking out through a gap there. It was ridiculous, it was unpleasant.
The difficulty is, I think...
But was it hatred?
Yeah, this is it, I think. The issue is, if you narrow it down simply just to the hate, you're not going to solve it. So it's not simply a question of persecution. It's also about policies. What policies are being implemented in different institutions? How is it that each institution can ensure every person who works in that institution has a fair crack at it? Not what's happening now. That's the problem.
That's already a legal requirement. It's already illegal to discriminate in employment on grounds of religion. The public sector, there is a public sector equality
But
duty.
only if they admit to it. If they don't admit to it, then there's no legal basis.
No, it requires evidence, but
no
it doesn't require a confession. It requires evidence, which is a different thing entirely.
Yeah, but if you look at, now, let me bring back Conservative Party again. Is it
but whatever thus with politics, you know, it's all smoke and mirrors, isn't it? You know, we're talking about something specific here. Your suggestion that the Conservative Party is being difficult, duplicitous, and opaque.
Yeah, there are two things in here, what I'm saying. I think one is Conservative Party as a party, yeah? When all the other political parties are okay with something, why is this one not being okay with it, yeah? And then when you look at it further into it, all the evidence shows that the party has got a problem. And when you get people like Muhammad Amin, Saida Barnas Warsi, all from within the Conservative Party saying that, look, you should look into it, and they keep denying it.
Are you not doing this to draw attention away from the fact that the Labour Party, it's being suggested, is institutionally anti-Semitic by suggesting that the Conservative Party is dragging its feet because it is anti-Muslim in some way.
Not at all. I'm one of those, and Amin will know this, who's been engaged with the Jewish community. When I was a member of the European Parliament, I was involved with getting the HERA definition through. So actually it's not equating with anything with Jewish community.
But it's rather convenient, isn't it, for the Labour Party, with you representing it, to be putting forward this
No, but
idea
I
of
want the Labour Party to deal
anti-Muslim.
with that as well.
Okay.
No, my position is, equally I've been strong, the Labour Party should also deal with that issue. There should be no one, irrespective of the faith, colour, creed, that they should be discriminated in Britain. That's the question.
Look, the reason why the Tory party is not accepting any definition of Islamophobia is quite simple. Why would they give anybody a big stick for them to be hit by? And it's not just about the...
Well, I'll give you another reason why they might want to do it, because it's much more difficult to bring these things in practice when you're in government. It's a great deal easier to make criticisms and to lay down your ideals when you're not in government.
That's the way.
So the Labour Party can say what it would like. The Liberal Democrats have also backed this.
My objection to the word Islamophobia is much more fundamental. Fixation on the word Islamophobia is actively harming Muslim interests, because every minute spent debating the meaning of the word Islamophobia is another minute not spent challenging anti-Muslim hatred.
I don't think Muslims care about the linguistic that much. They don't care whether it's Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hatred.
But by very virtue of the fact that there had to be a definition of it, and as I said in the introduction, little things matters, and those little things are words. By the very definition of the fact that you had to come up with a definition, that means that words are important.
Really, I mean, these are new words that have been largely discussed very recently. What does the definition itself, whatever the term is, Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hatred, does the definition itself lend itself to protect Muslims?
So the only way you see that this is changing things is by putting the word racism in there, which is there are more laws against race hatred than there are against religious hatred.
Yes.
So where does it go from here?
So
you have a Conservative Party that you say is not listening.
I think
you say there's no need to listen.
Yep.
No, I think they will listen. And the reason is, if you look at the evidence of what's happening on the ground, both on the ground level, people's impact on life, evidence is building that there's a problem. Then if you look at the political side, all the political parties have already started moving. They've moved. Even the Conservative Party in Scotland has moved. So how long can they resist this? I don't think they can, because everything goes against them.
The main reason why is because this government, on a number of issues, especially when it comes to prevent and counter extremism, they have institutionalized the idea of targeting Muslims. And this is not just myself. This is trade unions, it is academics, teachers. This government is creating policies that are institutionally Islamophobic. So the same notions, the same things, the same ideas that are being taught in
Let me ask you this then. Let me ask you this to round it up. Why do you think Islamophobia exists?
The critical reason the Islamophobia exists, and we've seen the rise of Islamophobia in line with the war on terror. So really, before 2011, Islamophobia wasn't really a thing in people's minds.
So whose fault was it then that it rose up after terror attacks carried out by Muslims? I'm just throwing that one out there.
So whose fault is it?
Yeah. Why did it increase after 9/11?
Because there's geopolitical interest to target Muslim countries. Look, when you look at the Islamophobia industry, when you look at Pamela Geller, when you look at like Fox News and various other sort of players inside the UK, there's a persistent effort to demonize Muslims, which works in line with the war machine that is active that was active in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and various other places around the world. And as long as there's geopolitical interest to essentially attack those countries, there will always be supply and demand to demonize Muslims.
How do you end Islamophobia, anti-Muslimism? Sorry, I was clumsy with that one. Right. Anti-Muslim feeling.
Well, first of all, anti-Muslim hatred, its biggest source, sadly, is a wrong reaction. So people hate me because I'm a Muslim because other Muslims in Sri Lanka commit terrible crimes. Anti-Muslim hatred has been, for the last 25 years, has been driven by bad behavior by other Muslims. Let's be blunt about that, where it comes from. It's wrong, but that's how people behave. And if Mormons were going around killing people there'll be a lot of anti-Mormon hatred.
So
around.
the killing has to stop.
Yes.
How do you think it can be ended?
Nobody can disagree the killing has to be stopped,
Yes,
irrespective
in general.
who's committing it.
Yeah.
The real issue here, I think, is there is a historical context to this. And then there is this war on terror, which has been actually pumping this narrative around, which has not been helpful. And then on top of that, I think media itself, we live in a global age where social media, the media is very powerful. It just goes around in seconds. And that is forcing people to small number of incidents that are happening, you're blaming billions. And I usually give an analogy of a football. You know, football is loved all over the world. Billions of people follow the football. Now, there are small number of football hooligans. Now, that doesn't mean the football is bad, football supporters are bad. And this is what's wrong here, because if small number are doing what Amin is saying, I accept that as well, does not give any right to anyone else to hold the whole billion plus responsibility.
So perhaps we have to wrap up the conversation.
That's what's happening.
Perhaps what you're suggesting is that if we take the football analogy a little bit further, that what you're putting down here is the equivalent of the video assistant referee. It's a way of looking at things a little bit more closely, but as we all know with VAR, there will still be controversy. Listen, thank you very much indeed. Nothing has been settled. It's been a very interesting shootout. Appreciate you coming in and appreciate you for taking the time to watch. I'm David Foster. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.